Thank you so much for tuning in. Today's episode is a really good one. Today I have the great fortune of speaking with Scott Tusa, having him back on the podcast. It's actually his third time on the podcast. Scott is someone who spent 9 years of his life as an ordained Buddhist monk. He was ordained by the Dalai Lama, and he has now taught Buddhist meditation and psychology all over the world. And he's actually speaking to us from Colombia, so there was a technical glitch. We do not have video for this, unfortunately, but we do have the audio that came out pretty well. And we cover a number of different topics. This kind of conversation really is at the heart of the intention of this podcast. So I was really happy to have him on and get to hear his wisdom and these beautiful teachings. And one thing that he shared that I liked a lot is he gave a kind of blueprint or roadmap for the Buddhist teachings as a whole, and just sum them up in the three words of renunciation mind, bodhicitta, and emptiness. So we talk about what those mean. We talk about a lot of other things. You can see our list of topics in the show notes below, as well as his website for more information about him. So I feel I would be amiss if I did not mention the unfolding tragedy that is happening right now in Ukraine. It's been so sad to see. It's been a heavy past week here. And one silver lining that I see is that it's bringing the free world together. And it's been wonderful to see so many people come together to stand against and speak out against this kind of aggression, this kind of violence, this kind of warfare. And, it's a real war of aggression, a provocation without much justification at all. And so I hope that in the long run, we're moving to a world where things like this become even more rare. But as we know, if we look at history, it's not that rare. So I reached out to my friend Theo Haresh, who has been on the podcast in the past. He's the author of the book, The Holocausts We All Deny. And he's really dedicated his life to peace and to stopping warfare and genocide. And he is releasing a new edition of his book with more information relevant to Russia and the situation in Ukraine. So that'll be a good opportunity to discuss this more. I'm going to link in the show notes below to a charity or two that you can donate to help the situation in Ukraine. And I guess one thing I could just say here is, in spite of all the history and geopolitical complexity, at the end of the day, there's a clear wrong here that's happening, and we're all watching it, and we're all feeling it, and it's terrible. And it's been a heavy week here for me, not just because of the situation in Ukraine, but just the nature of the work that I'm doing as a therapist, as a psychotherapist. I sometimes feel like I'm on the front line of a kind of war, not to compare this situation to the horrors that the people in Ukraine are experiencing, but there's a lot of suffering that I see here, and some of it is violent, some of it is really tragic and terrible and really hard to deal with. Even though we have a lot of peace and prosperity outwardly here in this country, the United States, we don't have as much inner peace and inner well-being as we should have and as we deserve. And so just in my work here, I'm seeing things like suicidality, addiction, domestic violence. That's a really tough one. That's an example of violence whose source is often a lack of maturity, communication, well-being. You could make a good argument that all human-directed violence has its source in some kind of mental derangement. In fact, the Buddhists have been talking about that for thousands of years. So I really hope that this podcast offers positive, helpful teachings and wisdom and even skills to help us navigate our life, to find more happiness and well-being in ourselves, and to cultivate that in others. So I wish you all the best, and I hope you enjoyed this episode of A State of Mind podcast. Here today with Scott Tusa. Scott, thank you for returning to A State of Mind podcast.
Thanks for having me again. It's really nice to be back.
Yeah, and you were just telling me that you're talking to us from Colombia, is that right?
Yeah, I'm in the Caribbean coast of Colombia in a place called Palomino, which is near the city of Santa Marta. So I come here every year, but I've been kind of in Colombia since December. So it's been 3 months.
Long stay.
Being here.
Yeah, it's funny. When I was a kid, I have this memory, for whatever reason, it's like so clear in my mind, of going to the library and getting this book called The World's Most Dangerous Places. And I was like so excited about this book. And Colombia was the number one most dangerous place at that time, at least in that book.
In the 80s and 90s. Yeah, in the 80s and 90s, it was more dangerous. Now it's changed a lot. And so
That's good.
and this place is a lot of ecotourism because it's one of the most biodiverse mountain ranges in the world, which is the La Sierra Nevada de Santa Marta. And so it's just really amazing here.
Cool. And what brought you there? Why are you going there?
I've been coming here for 5 years. And so my ex-girlfriend was from here. And she brought me here initially to help with a retreat. So she taught the yoga portion of the retreat, and then I taught the meditation part of the retreat. And it was on the beach here, and really nice. And so it was mostly for Colombians, but some, foreigners came to the retreat here. And so since then, I kind of fell in love with the country, and I've just been coming back every year, and people invited to do more and more teachings and retreats in Bogota and the cities, as well as retreats in more rural places like this. And just kind of, there was just karma there to keep coming. And then this time I came mainly, my current girlfriend's also from Colombia, so we came to spend the holidays with her family, and then also I led a retreat in Bogota and did some teaching. So kind of both.
Interesting.
Just be here.
Yeah. And so just to kind of catch people up, this is actually the third time you're on this podcast, which is great. And we met at retreat with Tsoknyi Rinpoche, Tibetan Buddhist Lama, who mostly the Ningma lineage, at least in my experience. And you're a longtime student of his, and maybe other teachers of Buddhism in general. And so when you're doing these retreats, it's as a Buddhist teacher, correct?
Yeah. Pretty much these days, I exclusively teach meditation from the Buddhist tradition, and to be more specific, from the Tibetan Buddhist lineages. And so, that's what I've been doing for 15 plus years, teaching and in these, trying to make sense of these lineages for myself and and practicing them for a little more than 20 years. And we've known each other for, I think, more than 10 years, because I met Tsoknyi Rinpoche in 2010, and I think you were around during that time, or at least shortly after.
Yeah. Oh, interesting. Yeah. I remember when I first met you, you were in robes. I think you were like a novice monk, or a monk of some kind.
I was a monk, for 9 years.
Now you've got long hair and a girlfriend, so things have changed.
Things have changed, Impermanence. I don't know if impermanence went in the right direction for me or the wrong. I'm still trying to figure that out on a daily basis.
Maybe it depends if you believe in future lives or not. How long were you a monk for?
I was a monk for 9 years. So from the age 28 through age 37. And about 6 or 7 of those years I spent in Crestone, Colorado, where we met. And 3 of those years I spent in retreat in California. And it was a big chunk of my life. For me, it felt like that, at least. Now I've been I returned my vows in 2017. So I've been out of it now for 18, 19, 20, 4 years.
Interesting. And you said 4 years. You first met Tsoknyi Rinpoche in 2010 and became a student?
Yeah, I was already involved in with my other root teacher, Lama Zopa Rinpoche, since around the year 2000, 2001. So I was already kind of like a monk by the time I met Tsoknyi Rinpoche, I was a monk already. I'd already spent about 10 years in mostly the Gelugpa lineage, studying there, practicing, etc. And when I met Tsoknyi Rinpoche, it was kind of like, oh, there's this whole other set of how to relate to Buddhist Tantra, and it really just opened for me, and as you know, because he's one of your teachers, I think his profundity and ability to speak to the Western mind and the Western sort of dilemma we have of approaching, such a profound thing as the Tibetan Buddhism and all its cultural contexts and, intricacies. I think he just really struck me as like, wow, he really helped me to go deeper, into my exploration in these lineages.
Cool. Yeah. I think I first received teachings from Tsoknyi Rinpoche in 2008. And the reason why I have that date in my mind is I got a card from him saying, you are a student of Tsoknyi Rinpoche, and it has his picture on it. And on the back, it has like the date and like his signature. And it was like,
that makes sense. Yeah.
And it was
cool.
And it kind of, I never met Lama Zopa, but I've heard a lot about him. But it's interesting for people listening how different these different lineages are. They have very different flavors, at least in my experience and in my mind. Like the Ningma, called the so-called old school Tibetan Buddhism, is a little bit more of a wild, like that crazy wisdom, wild energy of yogis, of people who may or might not be monks or nuns. Whereas the Gelugpa is much more monastic and at least has the reputation of being a lot stricter.
Yeah, I mean, I think you can find the range. I mean, since I haven't found them to be super different, but yeah, like you're saying, like some of the kind of outward casings as well as sort of presentations can be slightly different. I think one of the main differences is the Gelug lineage they just don't have Dzogchen lineages within their teachings. Although I think Lama Tsongkhapa, the founder of the Gelug, encountered that, but he didn't incorporate that into the lineage. So you have, so I think that's one of the biggest distinctions. And like you said, there's a non-monastic, a little bit more of a non-monastic presence within the Ningma, even though they have both. But the Ningma really holds that kind of, what we call the white sangha, meaning the ones who wear white clothes, the non-monastic, and the red sangha or orange, the ones who are monastic and wear that color robes.
Yeah. That's interesting to hear you say they're not, that different. And yeah, but it seems like, to me at least, like Dzogchen having those teachings, at least in my life when I encountered them, was a huge difference. But I wonder, like, in terms of the, there's a lot of ways in which they're pretty, very similar too, I'm sure.
Yeah, no. I think for me, like the essence is the same, which is, they both basically, we're trying to develop renunciation mind, bodhicitta, and emptiness. And then it's just like the approaches to that can vary. Like, so in the Gelug, they focus on the great Madhyamaka, or like the great middle way, where in the Ningma, they have great middle way teachings from Nagarjuna, etc. But then they also have Dzogchen, like as methodologies to approach the view and practices. So I think it's like the views don't differ that much in essence, but then the practices can differ, and like you were saying, like the kind of like outer trappings, how things can look, and the emphasis sometimes in the outer. But yeah, in the essence, I don't see too much difference. But
I like how you just named those three: the mind of renunciation, bodhicitta, emptiness. For people who don't know, bodhicitta is compassion, basically, right? How would you? I mean, that's a big subject in Buddhism. That's a good nutshell summary of the Buddhist teachings, right there.
Yeah, I mean, I feel really fortunate to have met Lama Zopa Rinpoche as one of my first teachers, and he just laid that out very clearly. It's like, in the Mahayana Buddhist path, what we're doing is trying to become those. We're trying to become renunciation mind. We're trying to become bodhicitta. We're trying to become emptiness, and that's also the practices and path that lead to awakening. So I think that always helped me to, when I got confused, because as the Tibetan Buddhist world is so big, and the Buddhist world is so big, and it can get confusing. Just a lot of moving parts. So to me, I always like that package of just essentializing, like, what am I trying to do? Oh yeah, I'm trying to bring those out of my experience,
Yeah, it's good to have something simple to come back to. And then when you study and practice more and more, a single word like bodhicitta can invoke so much. And it's kind of cool to have one word that can do that. It can become so meaningful and so multifaceted. And so you could talk about it for days probably and write books about it. But then you can have one word that you can come back to.
Totally. And I think, if we're going to sum up the path, I think from a Mahayana perspective, we could just say bodhicitta, because bodhicitta encompasses both the relative, like the mind of great compassion, great love, as well as altruism.
Mm-hmm.
And then it encompasses emptiness and ultimate bodhicitta or absolute bodhicitta. So I think, in one way you're right. That word is so profound, and it can be drawn out into like big explanations, or it can be very simple.
Yeah. And I think of it as, translating it as the mind of awakening. Does that feel good to you? The mind of awakening?
Yeah, definitely.
And then if we bring in a little bit of the more tantric Vajrayana elements, bodhicitta has a connotation of life energy, at least in my understanding. And
it can
at least, right? Like life force, life energy. And that to me is profound to think about, the kind of drive of life itself can be compassion, wisdom, caring for others. And actually, like when I think about this and think about something like evolution, we tend to think about and learn about evolution of species and humanity and people and all this stuff as this idea of the survival of the fittest, where the strongest, most fit organism carries on its genes to the next generation. But the more I think about it, and I'm not alone in this thought, we survive and pass on our genes by cooperating with other people, by cooperating with nature, by being in harmony with our environment. Those are the real, victories. Like, and there's also the individual strength and success too. They're not necessarily mutually exclusive, but we can understand biological evolution as containing this like bodhicitta drive towards greater life, greater complexity, greater intelligence. I just think it's cool to think about that in that kind of frame.
Yeah. Totally. And I think it's like, from a Buddhist perspective, it's not only like a really positive way to live our life with meaning in relation to others in the world, but it's also like, and I'll use this word carefully, from a Buddhist perspective, it's true. Again, like that's a big statement, but that's what they believe. So, in the sense that if all beings have a nature of awakening, what are the qualities of that awakening? And I would describe them, there's many qualities you can describe, but one of those qualities is interdependent, on each other, with each other. We're in relation to others. And so I think when we're moving away from, when we're closing that Buddha nature or putting more veils, we feel more separate from others. We feel more cut off. We feel more boxes in between us. And when we're opening that more, just in the spirit of what you're saying, there's more ability to see we're completely dependent upon each other, and we value that, and then build systems and relationships of cooperation. And I think this isn't necessarily awakening, but I think it's coming from our natural awakened essence,
Yeah, I love taking the Buddhist teachings and applying them just to our natural world. Like sometimes I think about it like science, biology, physics. It's meant to be a language describing what scientists observe. And I think in an important sense, a lot of the Buddhist teachings, it's meant to be describing reality, right? It's meant to, like, these masters who developed incredible insight and concentration and could watch their own mind at a very subtle, precise level, then they describe what they experience, what they see, what they realize. And so in that sense, it can be very scientific.
Yeah. I think it's, I think of it as, subjective science, essentially, And so, and then, I like to joke that Buddhism, and along with the many kinds of traditions that existed in India and still exist, but Buddhism itself has 2,600 years of research and development in subjective science, because so it's like, that's a lot of years of research and development. And what do we mean by research? Like you said, an individual yogini, gaining qualities of awareness to see into deeper and deeper layers of mind and reality, and to remove what's not reality. I mean, that's a big, subject here, and one of the points of mainly where the teachings point, I think. But then at the same time, there's the development of what comes out of that. So there's the research an individual does, but then they share that with others in community and in cooperation. Just to carry in the spirit of our previous conversation. And with that, there's the development of a tradition, and I think, I think of lineage like that rather than a hierarchy that sets rules and morals and tells us how to live. More it's like advice. Hey, if you want to do this, if you want to awaken to your natural state, this has worked. You know what I mean? And they share it through various teachings and practices, right?
Yeah, I like that. I'm drawn to your early comment about renunciation, bodhicitta, emptiness. I mean, for people listening to this, when you say the word renunciation, could you speak to that a little bit? What does that mean?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is one of the most confusing subjects in Buddhism. I was talking to a student today about it, actually, because it's both like a value, we could say. You know, I like adding the term mind that comes from Dzongkar Khyentse Rinpoche, where he doesn't just use the word renunciation, he uses the two words, renunciation, mind. Because renunciation in English, it gets, you know, if you take it very literally, it literally means like pushing away something, renouncing something, right? And I think often there's this image in people's mind of like, oh, in order to be pure spiritually, I need to, you know, abandon everything that doesn't appear to me as spiritual and do this other thing and become this other person. But you can, as you know, you can also build yourself into just another clinging, you know, on the spiritual path. We can sort of box ourselves into being a spiritual person, but we haven't renounced anything. Because what are we actually trying to renounce? And I think when you really look at the Buddhist teachings, we're trying to renounce the mind that clings to an appearance of reality that doesn't exist. I'm not saying reality doesn't exist. I'm saying we're clinging to an appearance of reality that doesn't exist. So a certain perspective or perception or appearance. And so when you really get down to the essence, that's what we're renouncing. And then on the way to that, we can renounce some other things or shift or turn our mind from some other things in order to help serve that. So for instance, yes, becoming a monastic can help. You know, taking precepts to avoid negative behaviors can help because it turns our mind away from the causes of suffering. And we lighten the load so we can see reality more. And I don't know about you, but for me, what I notice when you know, even it's just very simple negative things like being rough with someone or meaning like rough in speech or, you know, arguing with someone, it clouds my mind in that moment. It disturbs my mind and it makes meditation harder. So in a way, they're very practical rather than moral, the ethics of Buddhism. And the ethics lead to renunciation, but again, not this image of like a monk on a mountain. I think that can be authentic, right? Like I've met monks on mountains and they can be very authentic and beautiful and developed in their practice. But it also can be a deep fantasy for a lot of us Western meditators that like, oh, I can't do it as a mother of two kids here. I need to have this. And actually, that's false. In actuality, renunciation is about renouncing the mind that causes suffering or the states of mind that cause suffering. And so I think of renunciation like that. And the outer forms of it, like renouncing outer things, as maybe an assistance in that, not as a means into themselves, right?
That's great. That's a really good, clear description of that. And yeah, I think you're right that our idols, you know, things that we idolize can become our oppressors. Like when we start talking about Buddhism and meditation and the Buddha, and then you're the monk on the mountaintop, and I just wish I could be there and do that. And that's like, it's a real trap, you know. I mean, I've been there, I've felt that, and it's like this idealization of if we were in a certain place, a certain situation, then we could wake up or then we could practice. And
and
so unsatisfying. And so it's also like if you're really thinking that, you're not taking responsibility for your own circumstances. I mean, there's no law against going and sitting on top of a mountain if you want to do
that. Totally. And what's tricky here is like, and this is what I was talking about with a student today, is like, we have that perspective, which I think you and I both can agree on, right? What we're sharing now, but also the serene Buddha who sits straight and walks calmly and talks peacefully and, you know, has this aura around him, like that attracts us. And so I think we can't deny that either. You know, there is an attraction to the appearance of what looks, for lack of a better word, like holy. And I think that isn't necessarily bad. I think it's just sort of steps in our own spiritual evolution where for some of us, like I know for me, that's what attracted me initially. It was like, wow, there's this thing that has an outer appearance of awakening that's so different than the rest of the world. And so that image means a lot. That image is very powerful. And I think a lot of we work in images. And so in a way, I don't think that image of a, outwardly renounced monastic hermit, kind of whatever you want to think of it, or Buddha figure or something like that. Like, I don't think we need to get rid of that, because I think it attracts us on some very deep level. But we have to understand there's the outer form is to point us to the inner experience of that. And I think then it becomes, meaningful.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, I think we're, it's just, this memory just popped up of when I was in Nepal studying Buddhism, with Tsoknyi Rinpoche there at Bodhinath. And I was talking with this guy, I think he was like from Germany or something, and he was excitedly telling me about how his mom was really in the new agey kind of spirituality, and how she would, if she was having a rough time or something, she would just visualize this like beautiful glowing heart, and that would help her to calm down and be compassionate, come back to herself. And how he had this realization that it was basically the same thing as like a lot of the Tibetan Buddhist practices of visualization, and how visualizing a Buddha or visualizing a heart, like it's what's the real difference there if the effect is the same. And so we come to this question of skillful means of what helps us to ground, to be awake, to be compassionate. Maybe thinking of the Buddha helps, maybe thinking of some, whatever it is. It doesn't matter, like a heart, a cartoon, a mountain, I don't know. Like the effect of it is what matters, right? Not the thing itself.
Yeah, I mean, I think the effect that matters, and I think the form can come in a lot of different forms, right? Mm-hmm. And then, but the form has to follow through with something, and I think that's important. As an example of just like again, I think in very advanced Buddhist teachings, we talk about this as the balance, or the dance of the two truths, the relative and ultimate truth. And so it's like, yeah, in one way, it's like whatever brings meaning and is great, but then like the specificity of a relative truth also matters, And so then I think, and that's not to then preference Buddhism, it's just sort of to, because I obviously have a bias, but it's to, just say, I think symbols, and because we're really talking about symbols here, right? Symbols and the meaning we attribute to them, they matter. I think like the qualities of that symbol matter. I think that's the only, other than that, I agree with you.
No, I agree with that. It's interesting to think about that symbol of a heart, like the emoji, like I wonder what the history there is. I don't know, but I'm sure 1,000 years ago, if you showed that to someone, they wanted to connect it with your beating heart in your chest or love or whatever. So
totally.
Yeah.
I was on a retreat in Kentucky, helping with a meditation retreat for teens. And it was I don't tend to go, the only reason I end up at like Catholic centers or Jesuit centers or something is when people are renting it for a retreat, and then I'm teaching there or something. And so I ended up in this one, and it was a Sacred Heart. It was like the Jesuit where the Jesus, their Jesus is the Sacred Heart Jesus, and it's this, it's the symbol of the heart surrounded by thorns.
Right.
And I don't remember exactly the feeling, but there was just looking at this statue of Jesus with the heart there, just like, boom, it just hit me like, wow, this symbol is amazing. It's so profound what it's saying. So there's something around, for me, I mean, just thinking of heart, that's just one aspect of like, and that's an old Western symbol. I don't know the history of that, but that's not a new thing,
Yeah, it makes me think back towards the beginning of our conversation, talking about bodhicitta as the mind of awakening. I've also heard teachers talk about the heart of awakening, and how in the Buddhist tradition and a lot of in India, historically, the mind was in the heart, not in the brain. And
exactly.
Yeah,
I'm not like a Sanskrit person by any means, but I've read, and that chitta actually implies like not so much a mind in the way we think of it in the West, where I think a lot of us attribute mind to brain, right? Where actually it's more like heart mind. kind of like simultaneous. And Sanskrit has a lot of that, where one word can represent so much.
Yeah.
So you're right. Yeah, I think chitta really implies that in bodhicitta.
Yeah, I think that's actually a pretty profound thing to contemplate and consider when you're meditating. If you're trying to practice spirituality in whatever form, that our heart is here in the center of our body, both vertically, and horizontally, if that makes sense. And if you look at like the chakras or whatever, it's right there in the middle. It's what integrates. And to begin to find our center there rather than in our head, for me, just, that's been a pretty profound thing. I try to come back to that, throughout the day.
Yeah. Beautiful. Yeah, I agree. I think it seems so simple, but where we hold ourselves in the body matters a lot.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I'm a recovering top-down alcoholic, so that's been really, pivotal in my I could just attribute to, my Buddhist practice, my life as a whole, but definitely my Buddhist practice, really finding more bottom-up ways to be in the world. And especially actually, going back to Colombia, it's one reason why I like being in Latin America. And I'm not going to box Latin America into one thing, because it's many countries and many different kinds of cultures, as well as a lot of modern culture in cities. But where I am right now, closer to the jungle and these sacred spaces of indigenous here in Colombia, when you're with these indigenous people, they don't live. You can feel they're not living from the top down. They think, obviously, they're human beings, but there's just a way they even walk and hold their bodies that's just so different than modern people. I mean, modern Westerners, I should say.
Yeah. A question's coming up for me to ask you about, like you just mentioned, being in the Catholic place and seeing that symbol of the heart with the thorns, and the indigenous people in Colombia, and all these there's so many different spiritual traditions on this planet. Where do you stand in terms of, you're clearly on the Buddhist path, you clearly have respect for other traditions, but it just seems like there's this open question in the year 2022, where we have access to so much information, so many different teachings, traditions, lineages, to appreciate them, draw from them. Whereas I know some people are very like, this is my way, I'm just going to be on this one path. But a lot of people, that's not their reality, and they're not really interested in that. Do you have any thoughts to share about that?
Yeah, a lot. And I don't know. Let's see which direction I want to go in tonight. I'm not feeling very critical, so maybe I won't go in a critical direction. But I'll try to be clear with my feelings on it. Yeah, I think, it's obvious. I'll pull in one Buddhist principle, and I don't want to use it in a New Agey way, but I'll pull it in just for this conversation, because this is kind of like how I frame it for myself. Is that the Buddhist principle is Buddha nature, which is that essentially we all have this nature that's free and liberated, and we're just simply living with a covering over that. And so, when you get out of the jargon of Buddhism and the religious aspects, you really get down to, there is a belief that all beings have that, so that is part of the religion. But nonetheless, it's like this essence that goes beyond the religion, because when we say Buddha nature, it doesn't mean Buddhist nature, right? It's just Buddha, the Sanskrit word, which means awake. So it's just saying this awakened nature. Or going back to the word bodhicitta, that bodhicitta is alive and essential and is our being. It's like awakening is our being. And that doesn't matter what religion you are, what culture, what race, not even if you're human. Like anything that's sentient has this. And yet we remain blocked to that, or we can say like confused in a certain way. And so it can pop out here and there, but the Buddhist path is to remove the veils or confusion to that. Now getting out of Buddhism a little bit. It's kind of like obvious to me that we would seek to know that Buddha nature, I think, seeks itself. That awakened nature seeks itself. And then we seek it in many different ways, through many different religions, through many different perspectives. I believe a drug addict also seeks it. Yeah. I don't think they're going to find it in the drugs, but they're seeking it. So it's not to equalize everything. It's just to say we're all seeking that. And then through different spiritual paths, we can access that to some degree. Like, I think there's no doubt about that. I think it's really clear when you read the life stories of like great Christian saints or, different traditions, etc. So yeah, that's kind of like my feeling or my hypothesis, my personal hypothesis on sort of the lineages and traditions, etc. And then I also feel like it's important to preserve wisdom traditions. And so, we have this soup, not we, but there is a soup here in Colombia called sancocho, and it's one of my favorite foods here. It's basically like a soup. It depends where you are, if you're in the coast or in Bogota or Cali or Medellin or different areas. But generally, it's a soup that includes like potato, yuca, corn, some kind of meat, or maybe fish, or maybe chicken or something. And you can have it vegetarian too. And so it's a kind of mix, right? And so they sometimes use it as a joke here, like as a sancocho. I think, the soup itself is fine. It has all the right ingredients, but they use it also to explain something that's like all mixed up. You know what I mean? And so I think that's kind of, this is my personal feeling. I think that's our challenge, is that like learning from lots of different traditions and, how do you put it? Finding meaning in them and finding depth and wisdom. That's beautiful. And I think we all seek that. I know my spiritual path started that way, just reading different things and checking different things out. But I do feel that to really bring out purpose and meaning, we need to have I just don't have enough time to do all these things, Yeah. And I don't know how you feel, but for me, it's like really to go deep into our minds and experience and to uncover this awakened nature. It's a lot of work and it's a lot of time. And if I'm busy kind of like doing 5 different practices from 5 different traditions, I just don't have enough time for that. And, or, I might, get confused. This one's not good enough, so I go to this one. And so I think in a way, I'm a fan of going deep into one thing. And that's been just from my own experience. But at the same time, that doesn't mean we can't benefit and just have some meaning from other things, right? It's just what I practice is kind of like in one lineage. I put it that way.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, and you can go deep in one thing and have a lot of, like you're saying, a lot of appreciation for all kinds of things. But
yeah, and insights. Like I'll share one with you. So for me, going deep, or attempting to go deep, for instance, into the Ningma lineage of Tibetan Buddhism, there's a certain amount of openness you can see in some of the very experienced practitioners, like for instance in the Ati Yoga traditions. You can see some kind of way their eyes are and their bodies and the way they look. I don't know. It's very subjective, obviously, but it's like something in their being. And so anyways, like I was saying, I was in one area in the jungle just for a month, and a lot of indigenous live in that area. So they're just walking by all the time. And, indigenous are obviously just human beings, and there's a range having their own experiences, but they also have kind of like their lamas in this tradition. They call them mamos in the Kogis and Arhuaco, who live in this area. These are 2 different indigenous groups. And I was just blown away because I don't know what their practices are because they don't share them openly. But they have the qualities of some lamas I've met, like just in their being, the way they look, the way they walk, their behavior, things like that. And again, you have to get to know someone more deeper to really see if that's true. But nonetheless, I was kind of surprised. So that brought an insight, of like, okay, yeah, there's something they're doing that's bringing this way of being for them. Yeah. And I don't have to. I mean, I'm kind of curious, to be honest, but I don't have to know what that is, and I don't have to necessarily practice it because I have my own thing. But I can not only appreciate it, but have insight that, this can happen in another tradition. That's completely different.
That's good. I think that's important. It's a matter of respect too. That's also your own experience. Like, you're being honest, and I guess, like, while we're on the subject of Colombia and South America, the whole traditions of ayahuasca have become so popular, at least in Boulder and in a lot of spiritual communities, I think now more and more around the world. Like, I think that's a really growing thing of people traveling to Central and South America to experience that and try that. I mean, has that been part of your path at all?
A little bit. Yeah.
Do you have any insights around that? It's a really interesting thing.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was talking with someone a couple months ago, and they were like, I think ayahuasca is the most Catholic of all the psychedelics. And I was like, what are you talking about? And they're like, you go there and you throw up a lot and you're getting all the shit out of you, all your sins out. And they were connecting it with this idea of sin. And I was like, okay, that's an interesting perspective. I haven't heard that one. But it is, whatever you think about it, it is an experience in which you face and sit with and be with a great deal of discomfort, at least most of the time, at least in my experience and the experience of people I talk to about it. So that's interesting. If you sit still in meditation, you will also experience a great deal of discomfort.
Yeah. I mean, I don't have that much knowledge of it, but I think there is that facet of it that in some indigenous, because ayahuasca is used throughout South America, right? In different indigenous communities, they have a brew in Colombia. They call it yahe. They have a brew in Peru. That's slightly different, and it's the same plants, but the mixture is a little different. And then, of course, they have their own ways of seeing the world that are not necessarily, they have their own culture and practices, right? I have heard of some indigenous interpretations where it's like very much, I don't know if I call it Catholic, but it's very like, it's like removing, you're purifying, like so some aspects of plant medicine is actually not even ayahuasca. It's people will do like purifications for weeks, like not eating certain foods, like not eating salt and meat and things like that. And they're called dietas. And I haven't done one, so I can't really speak on it, but they're basically like cleaning the body. Mm-hmm. And then that in turn helps to clean the emotions and mind. And so I think there's some like purificatory aspects of it. But with any psychedelic, I think it sort of, it opens, and ayahuasca is very unique. I think it's I don't consider it like other psychedelics. You can't, like you were describing, I don't think you really have like fun on ayahuasca. Like you could take MDMA or something else and have a lot of fun. I don't think you have fun on ayahuasca. And so it has a very unique, experience where I think it attracts people who want to understand themselves and the world and want to do that in a profound, deep way. So I think that it has there's some interesting things around it. But like anything else, it's just an experience that happens and then ends. And so, if we don't have something to carry us through after that, like a regular meditation practice with purpose in that meditation practice and a path, it's just another experience that we end up forgetting, but I don't know. I have friends who do a lot of it, and some of them claim they've really transformed a lot just through doing it in certain contexts, not like alone. I mean, they're doing it with, indigenous elders and there's ceremony and ritual and context around it,
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I mean, it's interesting. And I guess it really is something special about a mindfulness meditation practice that you can do every day, even just a few minutes, wherever you are in the world, however, honestly, even if you're really sick or not feeling well or whatever's happening. I guess there are other things that you could do like that too. Like you could say prayers but there's something powerful in my life. It helps me feel grounded, a sense of consistency to have something that I can come back to every day, more or less, if I want to. And
I mean, exactly. And I think just having a tool to explore the mind is important. And I think I kind of thought of this analogy with ayahuasca, and this applies to other psychedelics too, because it's so popular in plant medicine nowadays as a spiritual path, right? I think of psychedelics is, often people get into, again, like deifying the medicine or making another God figure out of the medicine, when actually the medicine's just interacting with the body to open the mind in a certain way, right? And I'm not saying I'm not trying to disrespect indigenous beliefs. Like that medicine could also have a being or spirit connected to it or whatever. I'm sure, but nonetheless, it's doing something in the body. So like, I have a friend who, I like what she said. She said, we are the medicine. And so I really like that because it's very in line with Buddhism. And, but yet we're augmenting our system and physiology and energy systems to bring about an experience. For a lot of people, it can be all kinds of things, but also people can experience non-duality on these things. And I think that's part of the draw. Yeah. But I think of it like this analogy, like light coming through. What do you call those window panes in a church that are different colors?
Stained glass window.
Yeah, like a stained glass window. And so when the sun pours through that, the sun doesn't. Well, let's say the light doesn't have a color; it's just light.
Right.
But then it pours through the stained glass window and then appears in different ways. And I think without some experience of the mind, we get really caught in the color, the appearance of the colors, when you're on psychedelics, including ayahuasca. And then that can become its own trip, where I think if we can see the light that's coming through the colors, then I think possibly, there's some ways to help benefit one's practice, in awakening. Yeah.
I like that analogy. Yeah. Definitely.
Yeah.
For me, there's it's in Buddhism. I also got it from what was his name? Sri Nisargadatta. What did you say it? He had a book.
Yeah, I don't know. No idea how you say his name.
It's a spiritual
book.
But
I love him.
Yeah. Very similar to Dzogchen teachings, but this idea of non-duality, this idea of having an insight that is true, to use that word, regardless of circumstances, whether those circumstances are a particular medicine or psychedelic or sitting or fasting or normal life, or that non-duality of consciousness of Buddha nature, what I would call Buddha nature. Like, to me, that's the real insight, the real goal to integrate, to tap into, and then you can appreciate all the different colors and displays, but you're not fixated on them, or you're not taking drugs to just have a sensory experience, which is going to come and go, and it doesn't seem to me probably not going to be that profound, because then it's not going to be there.
Yeah, I mean, it changes. So then it just becomes an experience that then we remember, but then we're trying to repeat that or deepen that. But it's just a thought. It's just an idea.
Right.
So I think when you're in the moment with whatever, whether it's a plant medicine or meditation or whatever, when you're seeing the mind, and I think plant medicine, it just brings more. It brings both out. So it brings the nature. It has the possibility to bring the nature of mind out a little bit more, but it also brings out all the, like you were saying, like all the the colors and qualities that are, is more how the nature mind is displaying, which is happening now. But for me, it's definitely boring right now. It's just, I mean, besides you, but it's just like it's like a room was what I meant. Like I'm in a room with not much here. So it's not very interesting aside from our conversation.
Right.
And it's not ayahuasca and all those things, but nonetheless, it's the same thing. It's like the nature. I'm not saying I'm recognizing the nature of mind, but just assuming it's there, and then there's the display coming off of it. And I think, I don't know. I'm still kind of like on the fence, but it seems like psychedelics can have the quality to bring that nature of mind out more, but we often miss it because, like I was saying, we're stuck in the colors that the light is producing, which again is the display. Yeah,
I think this is a really good conversation to be having, because psychedelics are more and more on the forefront, and a lot of people are experimenting with them, and we're basically talking about grounding the experience in a kind of wisdom that hopefully transcends any particular experience. So you're not trying to recreate something, you're not fixated or stuck. I think the other thing that happens is the nature of mind, or Buddha nature, or or essence nature, whatever words you want to use to refer to it. At some moments in time, like you're saying, it shines forth, and you have some experience of it. You have some, insight, and then that moment passes. That moment becomes a memory, and we tend to attach that experience to the circumstances. When in fact, in that moment, if you could actually go back there, there would be some recognition that it was beyond circumstances. It wasn't from something outside yourself.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and I think that's one of the most challenging things in non-dual traditions, especially when you have the opportunity to meet a really great master when they've actualized their Buddha nature. They have the, not potential, they have the ability to kind of transmit that being around them, not because they're giving us something. It's more waking up what we have, but their light so bright, it's just brighter to help wake that up out of us. And I think, the danger is like we can have some very strong experience, but then we don't know how to carry that through. And I think that's, just bringing it back to the context of Buddhism, because that's what I know. I don't know that much about other things because I'm kind of, like I said, I kind of focus on one path. The whole context of Buddhism, we could just say, like, just to make it more clear, ethics, meditative awareness, and insight or wisdom born from insight meditation. Like those three pillars then give the support for, like, for instance, for a tantric practitioner where you're working with the profundity of transmission and these kinds of things from the realized beings in your own Buddha nature and all that. It brings a container to actually, like, not just keep that as a souvenir, but to actually practice that and bring that out more in one's practice. And I think that's probably not only the biggest danger, because one can fool oneself just having a memory of something and thinking one has something profound, but it can also become, an obstacle, because it's sort of like, then we don't, I found the hardest thing to do is to just put in the work daily, because the work daily is really tedious and boring most of the time. And like you said, uncomfortable too.
Right.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So that's, I think, we use this word merit, which is a terrible English word to use to represent this, but merit really just refers to, like, the capacity of our Buddha nature. And so we do things to, like, bring that capacity out, where we call it accumulating merit or something like that. And I think of this now as and again, I'm augmenting the traditional teaching a little bit, but I think of this now of really just sort of, that capacity allows us to not only bring the experience out, but to sustain it, and that's harder. I think that's more difficult, where I think it's not so difficult to recognize nature of mind or Buddha nature through either, a transmission or some kind of life experience, like a near-death experience or a psychedelic experience. That happens to a lot of us, but we don't know how to cultivate that, and that's the trickier part, I found.
Yeah, I agree. And then it leaves open the question of ethics, which, as you just said and know, in the Buddhist tradition, that's foundational, and there's a lot of emphasis on that, on being ethical. And then, but this question of, like, just being able to have experience or some insight into the nature of mind doesn't seem to translate into, obviously, perfect ethical action in the rest of your life. And so if you're not working that muscle, so to speak, putting in the work there, you're going to run into trouble sooner or later, it seems like. And it seems like there's been some pretty powerful teachers who've had genuine insight and able to transmit that to others to some degree who then aren't acting ethically. And so it's a complex picture. And I don't know if you want to speak to that at all. But we've had so many scandals, we've had so many of these idols that then get torn down.
Yeah, I think we talked about this last time. I think it was, because I think maybe.
Oh, that's right. The
symbolic.
Yeah,
that was going on 3 years ago or 4 years ago, I think. Okay, like, I'll just start with this, because you and I don't want to assume you, but I notice a lot of people like myself who grew up in the West, we have a lens, that we see through, and we see right and wrong and morality and ethics through a very Western lens. And I would argue, like, a very black and white, and that's not necessarily bad. It sometimes makes it easier to function in the world. You know what I mean? Like you just say, this is right and this is wrong.
Right.
And then it makes it easy to decide something or judge something. but it's not always true. And actually, sometimes that heavy right and wrong becomes very rigid,
Mm-hmm.
and creates a lot of tension for us, and neurotic thinking, as well as don't get me started in just the vomit that comes out in social media.
Yeah.
Meaning, like, I don't think that really does much good for anyone, so it's just sort of just emotional vomiting, Yeah, and we've talked about that before. Where people are realizing, I don't think that's like doing very much, And I'm not saying like protest doesn't do much, because raising our voice when something is ethically wrong and or violent towards the world or an individual or a group of people, that's like our responsibility. We have to speak up, right? But as you know, it's becoming increasingly difficult to discern what is truth. We're in this cultural moment, and a lot of us are existential crisis around them. But again, that's a side fact if we want. But so none of those kind of wrong. In my experience of Buddhism, it just doesn't have that. But at the same time, it has a value system and a way to discuss what is harmful and what is helpful, right? And ultimately, what's harmful and helpful is to point us towards awakening, right? Like, and that's not vague. Like, it's not just random what we make up, what's helpful and harmful, and that's really important, And I think, but again, it's not the moralism that becomes the key thing that brings meaning. It's what it's pointing us to. It's what it's moving us towards. And I think because of the heavy right and wrong, black and white in the West, often we lose sight of that easily, and then it just becomes, this guy, he's either got to be all good and a saint or all bad. There's not a lot of room in the middle, for gray area. And I think in Buddhism, just to wrap up my thought process when it comes to like teacher misconduct and stuff, awakening and the scope of awakening is a big scope in Buddhism. It's not like black and white. It's not like you're just some normal everyday Jane one day and then you're a Buddha, and you're perfect. There's a lot of room in the middle. And so some of our lineage figures, as well as teachers who are out there, you have a whole range, and some people are still working their shit out. Like that's just the truth, I think. And then you have some people who work their shit out, and I don't know if that means their conduct is going to be perfect in the way we want to see it as perfect always, but definitely it's going to be in alignment with awakening, which is they don't have a self, like a drive to please themselves. It's if they truly have that, it's in service of others. But again, it's really difficult to discern that sometimes because there's many means to benefit others. But without getting the weeds in that, I'll leave it there.
Okay, yeah, no, those are some good points. Another way to ask the question that I was thinking about is, do you think that insight into the nature of mind or consciousness automatically leads to more ethical behavior in the world?
Yes, but it doesn't happen overnight, So it's not like again, it's like when we recognize nature of mind, for most of us, it's just a flash.
Right.
It's like nothing. It's just like super there and gone. And then, so and then whatever, we're meditating in, something else or doing something else. So yes, I think if we persevere in it and it's authentically nature of mind, yes, I do think that the conduct of a bodhisattva and a Buddha then arises from that, because it naturally eliminates the causes of suffering. Meaning like naturally renunciation can start to develop, but for most people that's a long process. So we need to cultivate them too, like artificially, right, in our conduct. Yeah. And that's why I was saying it's like the context really matters, because like if we don't have the container and the understanding of that container, we don't have a complete path where, for me, I get angry, I I lust after things, good food, etc. And so I need to employ, outer ethical conduct, because I'm not there yet. I'm just, a practitioner trying my best. So, but, that's tricky because it takes like radical self-honesty to see like, where are we at and how do we apply these things? And just being really honest. But at the same time, yeah, definitely like our nature is not harmful. The problem is we're confused about the nature, so we can be harmful sometimes. And even that, it's like there has to be room to see mistakes, in each other, and to be okay with each other making mistakes. Now, some of those mistakes are harmful enough to another individual or group that there needs to be some kind of, obviously, like, thing to do with that person, right? To protect others.
Right.
Consequences, yeah. But those consequences never should be, from my perspective, or Buddhist perspective, or Buddha nature perspective, to demonize the person. And this thought of someone being evil, it just doesn't exist in Buddhism. Someone can do evil things, but there's no one who's evil. And I think that is a very Western lens that often gets mixed up, in these witch hunts that happen. Like Joe Rogan. I was just noticing recently, like, people really went after this guy. And I was like, I listen to Joe Rogan. I'm like once in a while, it pops up on YouTube, and I'm like, some conversation with a comedian. I'm like, I don't, I understand he was controversial because of his stance in COVID and all that, and I'm not going to get into that. That's not my point. But my point is like, he didn't seem like a devil to me. But again,
it's a great point. It's an important one, and it's worth talking about. And like, yeah, I think we just need a more sophisticated understanding of humans and our complexities, and that the human can do good things. They could also say something hurtful or bad. They can do negative things. Like, that's all true. It's not, it's a both and rather than an either or. And I think if we could see that, it would actually help us. If like culturally we could like have a more shared understanding around that, it would help us to prevent some of the scandals. Because part of what I see actually is because of the black and white thinking you described, if someone's either good or bad, then when they're good and we put them on a pedestal, then we're ignoring all the signs, And if we had a more complex, nuanced understanding, we could have more accountability. We could be more human to human. Okay, you're on a pedestal, but you're also human. Like, let's have some accountability. Let's have some process. Yeah.
Totally. I think that's a great point. And I think this is one of the major growing pains in Buddhism coming to the West, because it's really hard to understand like cultural context and how to relate to a teacher, for instance. Like, I think it took me 15 years to learn how to relate to a Tibetan teacher. And I'm not saying I know how to right now. I make all kinds of mistakes. Yeah. But there's more context for me now and more learning and sort of like, this sense. I still don't understand some of the cultural things, like some of the cultural things drive me crazy. Like Tibetans are, culturally they don't share their emotions, and they're not very direct. Like, it's very rude to be direct. And I struggle in those kinds of cultures. Like, for instance, Colombia, it's very direct, especially here in the coast. Like, right away what's going on with someone. And maybe, for me, I like that. Where in Mexico, it's a little different. So even within like Mexicans are a little bit more polite and reserved, but so you can't tell so much where someone's coming from. Not all the time, but sometimes. And in Tibetan cultures like that too, and that drives me crazy. But so that I don't understand. But relating to a teacher, I think it's like, again, it's like understanding what we're getting into with the person, like what kind of relationship we're entering. And I think there's a lot of education that needs to take place on that. Not because it's like then the teacher doesn't need to take responsibility for their actions. No, that it's not to obfuscate. Is the right word? It's not to obfuscate the teacher. No, it's just to like have communication together. And I think there's a lot of miscommunication and projection and stuff like that. And yeah, that's just kind of like growing pains, Buddhism in the West.
In the Buddhist tradition, like in Tibet and India, the yogis or yoginis who kind of left the monasteries, left established society, in my understanding, like they would be more direct in the way you were describing, the more kind of out there and more just kind of simply being themselves. I wonder.
Yeah, that's a good
When you
point.
describe those cultural differences, I totally get what you're saying, and I agree with you. And I realize I kind of have a value where I actually value the more directness, and I work on myself to become more direct because being polite or not saying what you really think actually causes a lot of problems, right, interpersonally, and so.
It
But I
can.
grew up in my family was pretty English and Jewish, and there was like this kind of European don't really say what you really feel kind of attitude that I think causes problems. I think more than helps. So,
Yeah. I don't know, like, which causes more problem. I'm reflecting on that,
yeah,
personally, like what causes more problems or less. But at the same time, I hear you, and I think, yeah, and just to comment on the yogis, yeah, yogis I met tend to be more direct, and I think that's kind of a result of that cultural conflict where they almost become the ones, and I think even Tibetans like that, like they really like that spirit. Like one of the most popular figures in Buddhist and Tibetan culture is Drukpa Kumle. Was a yogi and very very controversial in his behavior, and so I think people like that because he's very direct, and there's kind of something in that where it's like counterculture,
mm-hmm.
and so real yogis Tibetan yogis tend to be quite counterculture.
A good point.
I find,
Yeah.
Able to work in the culture.
It's like the difference between, I guess, what you could call high society, where there's a lot of honorifics and a lot of formalities and ways to be polite and to show reverence and respect. And honestly, we have that in America too. It's not just an Eastern thing or an old world thing. It's part of human culture, society, and then there's people that break through that, like the punk rockers or the whoever. And yeah.
Yeah, I think that always exists as like a checks and balances, maybe, and I do want to add on to one of my statements, which is like there are real yogis who are very polite too. So I want to be clear, like not all are gruff. Sometimes it depends what part of Tibet they come from too. But at the same time, I think defining a yogi by their directness or not maybe is not always true, but at the same time, you can find some Tibetan yogis who are like that, kind of more direct, like you said.
Yeah. Well, so I guess the ideal of the Buddha is someone who's really awake, is whatever circumstance, situation, person, they meet them exactly where they need to be met. Maybe it's politeness, maybe it's kindness, maybe it's directness, maybe it's roughness even. That's the ideal. It's a beautiful ideal.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, and then you have some figures like Chatra Sangye Dorje Chatra Rinpoche, who, I never met, but I have teachers who knew him. And the stories you often hear, it was always directness. There was no compromise, So you do have people like that too. But I don't think it meant he was rude. He was just direct,
Yeah. Okay. Well, thanks for talking with me. You have any other thoughts for us? We didn't really get into emptiness much in your original 3.
Oh yeah, we talked about renunciation. We didn't talk about bodhicitta that much. A little bit. No, I mean, maybe for next time. I don't know. unless you have any specific. It's a big camp.
Yeah.
Big box.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of like a succinct way to put it, but maybe to me it connects with not having a fixed self, right? That's one avenue into it, at least.
Mm-hmm.
Like nothing that's permanent, nothing that's existing independently from everything else, and that isn't singular either. That's an interesting one to think about. If like any particular object or even yourself, if you look at it closely, it's made up of different parts. And then those parts are made up of parts, and those parts are made up of parts. That's a kind of avenue in emptiness too, I think.
Definitely, yeah. And I think you're pointing out, in Buddhism, there's so many different avenues into that, and we talked a lot about Buddha nature. So really, like you can say like emptiness and Buddha nature are analogous or analogous, like they're analogies of each other. They're just different words describing, different aspects of the Buddha nature. But essentially, the Buddha nature means emptiness, when you really look at it.
Yeah.
And so, just going back to kind of what we were saying earlier, I mean, for me, it's like, it's very important, at least from a Buddhist perspective, it has to be very clear that what we're doing is pointing us in a direction. And if we're going to generalize it, it's about pointing us in the direction of being free. And free of what? Being free of suffering and its causes. First, having some facility of that for ourselves, and then being able to benefit others to help them facilitate that. And really, when we talk about that, what is that freedom? That freedom is allowing an experience or a connection to the nature of how things are, oneself, others, the world, to flourish and to come about. And one word we use to describe how things are on the absolute level is empty of true existence, or empty of, like you said, independent, singular, and permanent existence. But empty doesn't mean nothing. So for your listeners who are new to this term, it doesn't mean nothingness. It means just that, a lack of some kind of findable, fixed reality. But at the same time, things appear and function. And so that's where really I think the real depth and power of the emptiness teachings come out, because we have to find some way to not exclude that from our daily experience and reality, in the sense that, we still have bodies, and we still have to interact, and we still have thoughts that come up and emotions. So how do we become free without then, basically falling into nihilism or nihilism? How do we become free without rejecting our experience? And I think that's one of the most challenging things. It's very easy to believe in something or to believe in nothing. That's really easy, actually. What's difficult is to go beyond belief. Like, that's what emptiness teachings are asking us to do.
I love that. Yeah. And
that's where true freedom lies from a Buddhist perspective. So for me, it's what drew me into Buddhism, and it's what keeps me here. Because when you become obsessed with freedom, and really, what does that mean? I think even exploring the word freedom is really interesting, because we often use sort of liberation or freedom, and I like exploring that, because it's like, sort of, for me, I have this kind of mind where I like ruling things out. Like, okay, is this going to have freedom or create freedom for me, or liberation? No. Okay. I might still have the habit pattern to be stuck with that, but at least I know the way, I know which way I want to move. And so, or cultivate what I want to cultivate. And so I think, anyways, I'm sort of setting up the context of why we would want to meditate on emptiness. But I think essentializing it, it's like belief in something and belief in nothing causes suffering. Going beyond belief eliminates all the extremes, but how do we go beyond belief? And that's the challenge. And that's where the path of shamatha and vipassana are there to support us in Buddhism to actually do that. Because we could just say, I go beyond belief. And I had someone on Instagram, sorry, dude, if you're listening to this, I don't mean to insult you, but, he was like vehemently attacking me as like a religious believer. I made the mistake of thinking, I don't argue on social media anymore. It's pretty much pointless. But he really hooked me in, because I thought he was Buddhist. And so I started to quote some sutra things and just discuss, the extremes of nihilism, extremes of eternalism or materialism, like we're talking about. And, going into the emptiness a little bit, and it's just a comment, because he asked the question. And then I realized, he's not a Buddhist. And then more so, he's like kind of he's really into nihilism, or he sort of feels that's the way to do things. And then I realized, what was interesting was this sort of like saying, because I think his main critique was around this sort of what sounded like a bunch of religious beliefs. But for me, it's obvious, like when we're using language and having a conversation, whether it's in text or you and me and verbally, it's like we already are accepting duality. We're already accepting, hey, Julian, we're going to have a dualistic conversation that is going to hopefully be constructive. But like as Dzongso Khyentse says, I really like this, Dzongso Khyentse Rinpoche, there's no such thing as, a communication. There's only constructive miscommunication and unconstructive miscommunication. Because it's a relative truth. Like when I say a certain phrase or a sentence, like we're trying to get to some understanding together, but you're not understanding and or thinking and or hearing it in the same way I am, nor am I hearing, thinking, and understanding you in the same way you understand yourself and thoughts. So we're just trying to constructively miscommunicate. and so it's sort of a given that we're going to be using language dualistically. And so anyways, I'm kind of a long way to say that, it was interesting. I had some thoughts and reflections after this little exchange on Instagram, mostly that I don't ever want to do that again on Instagram. That was the first thing, that like I broke my rule. My rule is don't debate with anyone on social media. And if you want to do that, whoever's listening out there, go for it. It's just something I'm not interested in. I'm not interested in that kind of communication with people. I'm happy to communicate in other ways, but debate in other ways. But anyways, so I broke my rule. So that was my first insight. And then my second insight was around belief and really like, oh, it's so interesting because like one can claim, oh, I'm beyond all this religious dogma. I just want to do this, but that's also a belief. It's just an idea. You know what I mean? It's just a perspective.
Right.
And so it's still binding, not saying like I'm unbound. Of course I'm bound in my Buddhist beliefs. Like that's obvious from this conversation. So, but I know that, you know what I mean? Like I accept that. There's some honesty there. You know what I mean? Yeah. I know I'm bound to that. Yeah.
Right. To claim you're totally unbound is quite the claim. And if you study the Buddhist teachings, you understand the depth of that a little bit more, hopefully.
Yeah. And I think, and there's a way like, how do you put it? We can't just state, I'm going to be unbound.
Right.
And he wasn't saying that just to give him credit. He was saying, he wanted a path that doesn't have beliefs to then go into, unbinding duality. But I don't know, maybe that's possible. Maybe I'm just sort of kind of stupid, but I think it's pretty difficult to do that, like, because then we just end up having some other set of beliefs that is unconscious, and so, yeah.
That's interesting. I really appreciate your transparency of your own process, how you sit back and reflect on things, and you're like, the social media debate's not that good. But like, I think Zen Buddhism is really trying to do that, at least in my understanding of it. It's a very, can be very more austere and like, let's get rid of all the beliefs. And as I've gotten older, I just really appreciate all the colors and techniques and teachings in Tibetan Buddhism and in Tantra in general, and in like non-dual Kashmir Shaivism. I've been studying some of that. It's just like, it's great to get beyond all beliefs, and it's also great to just enjoy this like amazing banquet of life and like all this ways things express and play, and so because
Totally.
That could become, like you're saying, a fixation. I want to get beyond all beliefs. I don't want to be bound by anything. I don't want to belong to any religion or any path or and maybe that's like an ultimate kind of freedom, but like one of my meditation teachers said, it's not freedom from this or that, it's freedom to experience. And that really impacted me. Oh, I have the freedom to have different experiences, the freedom to feel my body, the freedom to feel my breath, the
Super
freedom
nice.
to act, the freedom to create, the freedom to sit, whatever.
Totally. Yeah, that's beautiful. Yeah, I mean, I was thinking like the freedom to be, which is just another way to say the same thing you're saying. And it's almost funny because like we have these very complex and, like I said, 2,600 years of research and development in the case of Buddhism, lots of things, practices, perspectives to take, but actually it's all to learn how to be. But that kind of being it's not just, this is tricky because it sounds so simple. It's like that kind of experiencing, as you're saying, and or being means beyond any kind of like sense of self and other, any kind of sense of like stuck in our thought way of seeing the world. And I think it's very simple, but for some reason it's very complex for us too.
Yeah. And maybe the word being is better than experiencing, even, because being, sometimes you could be in such a way where you feel you transcend experience, whatever that means. I don't know, but so yeah, whatever word or whatever label it's possible to transcend that word or label, at least theoretically. So
exactly. And I think, I mean, for me, being is really hard. For me, my mind, emotions, constantly take me out of being, as well as just this kind of like underneath, how do you put it, like dissatisfaction. I'm just like, something's not right,
Yeah.
And so
it's interesting to think about, like, a perspective that maybe all or 99%, I don't know, of our problems or sufferings are being caused that we can't just be. Like there's wars starting now in Ukraine and Russia. Like, they can't just be. Why can't they just be? Or we're destroying the world with consumerism. Why can't we just be without buying all this stuff? Like, we can't do it. It's hard for us.
That's it. No, it's super beautiful. It's funny. I was thinking that pretty much that exact thing earlier today. I was thinking about, the conflict in Ukraine now. And I was thinking, why does that even have to happen? And I was thinking that exact thing. It's a lack of an ability to be.
Right.
And I'm super happy you brought in other things like consumerism and other things. And even like, I mean, if we're going to be fair, Buddhist path, why can't we just be? And again, going back to my point, it's like, most of us, we need to engage some path in order to relearn how to be. For some people, maybe no. So I do want to acknowledge that. For me, I need something, to help me to relearn how to be. And I use the word relearn, specifically because they, sometimes in the Dzogchen lineages and teachings, they say like reawaken, when they talk about Buddha nature, like they're reawakening. And I really like that, because it's like, first of all, it's helpful, whether it's like literal or not. It's very helpful for confidence, because like, okay, I'm learning how to. But yeah. Anyways, I love. Yeah, it's funny because like, what would the world look like if we all just were to be? It would be a very simple place, no? I think it would be very simple. But I mean, we still need to like be and do things. Like if we have a human body, we need to cultivate food, and there's sort of just things we need. But we can be while we do that. Being doesn't mean we do nothing. Because as you know, I'm pretty good at not being while doing nothing. Like I can do that too. You know what I mean? So like we can not do nothing and still not be. And we can be like, we can do a lot of things and be. That's also possible.
Yeah. Do you think maybe one way to put it would be, you could still do what you need to do and see people and be creative and live and eat and all this stuff, but you wouldn't be motivated by this sense of lack in terms of who you are at your core that seems to drive so much of us, that like, there's something wrong with me, so I need to make this podcast so I can feel like a good person or something. There's something totally happening. Yeah.
I mean, when we're talking about being in its most ultimate sense, which is what I'm implying here, is I think we've dissolved that core. And I think once that core dissolves, that's when we can be. But that, and like you're saying, it's the same for me. Like without that core, it doesn't feel like anything's meaningful. And that's the samsaric illusion, the illusion of self. Part of that illusion.
Interesting. Well, what do you mean by
which emptiness is remedying? Well, I don't know what you meant exactly. So again, constructive miscommunication. But so maybe you can explain it to me. But I was thinking of it as like some kind of center of self, some kind of like locus point of meanness, right?
I guess that I'm meaning that, and maybe it's always with that sense of meanness that carries a sense of lack, a sense of not okayness, a sense of not enough, a sense of some negative belief about you in relation to the world or other people, that you then act from that belief, right, to try to make that right. something like that.
Totally. Yeah, that's how I see it in my own experience. and until we have a shift and see that there's another option, we don't know anything about that experience. And
right.
I think that's where, coming full circle back to great compassion and bodhicitta, that's where the bodhicitta really arises in the Mahayana path. It arises from seeing that confusion within oneself and seeing that others are also functioning from that confusion. So it's primarily towards that confusion, rather than, oh, poor guy, like he lost his job. Like, that's not really compassion from a Buddhist perspective, because we're kind of looking down on it. There's a sense of like, oh, he lost something, so he's lesser or something like that. Like a subtle sense of that, where Buddhist compassion related to bodhicitta is more like, oh, this person has Buddha nature, and they're not seeing that. And that sucks. I want them to see that,
Yeah, that's a good way to say it. Well, this is a sweet place to get to in this conversation. It feels profound for me. It's almost like a co-meditation, like meditating on the things we're talking about while we're talking about this.
Totally. Me too. Yeah, I was going to say that too. Yeah, it's like we were able to dance together in our conversation, and I could feel it. So thank you very much. Like it helped. It helped me a lot, actually. So thank you.
Good. Yeah, me too. Well, thanks for being on round 3 on a State of Mind podcast. This is great.
Round 3. Yeah, we made it.
I'll link your website below, and people can find you and they can work with you one-on-one, right? For meditation and teachings. And
yeah, I'm still doing that. I'm still doing one-to-one work and teaching here and there. It kind of like the pandemic, a lot shifted in that arena. But I still do stuff online and starting to do stuff in person. But yeah, I'm kind of, for me, it's very much, how do you put it? Has to be in alignment, to use a modern word. Like for me, it's not so much a business. It has to have some alignment.
That's good. That's refreshing to hear. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, thanks so much.
Thanks so much, man. Really, really appreciate it. It's really nice to join you again.
Thank you so much for listening to another episode of A State of Mind podcast. If you found value in this podcast and would like to support it, one of the easiest and best ways you can do so is just share about it with friends and family, post about it on your own social media accounts. You can now leave us a review on Spotify as well as Apple Podcasts, and you can send us a voice memo through most podcast listening apps. You can learn more about my work as a meditation teacher, coach, and psychotherapist and my other offerings at astateofmindcounseling.org. And you can become a supporting member at patreon.com/astateofmind, where you can receive guided meditations, extra videos, extra artwork and music, and other goodies for subscribing members. See you here next time. Until then, all the best.